It's November again, and let's see what kind of system we're building on this month's Budget Builds monthly episode.
Before we get into it, I want to give a quick insight as to what we do for this series. We take your budget and answers from a request form. In the video description, there is a link to a Google form. It slowly gets updated every so often. With this information, we try to build the best computer we can to fit your means. Unless there are budget constraints, we spec out systems on AMD and Intel, both using their DDR4 and DDR5 Gen platforms. Once the build lists are complete, we compare each build using online benchmarks and list out the pros and cons between the top builds from the benchmarks. Using those, then we can determine what build is the best for your use case. But we can't do any of that without your input. Speaking of the Google form, let's see how you fill it out.
Just in case you forgot or you're new to the channel, here's how we fill out the Budget Builds request form. Now, budget builds do not include taxes, fees, or Windows keys unless stated otherwise. We do not collect your Google information. Just don't worry about that. You don't have to sign in. Budgets are in USD. Now you can select your type of system, whether you want gaming, working, or a combination of the two. Form factor preferences. This will determine what case we go with. So if you go for a mini ITX, then we'll go with a mini ITX case. Or if you go for ATX, then we'll go for at least an ATX case. Now you can let us know down in the comments at the end of this if you want a mini ITX board within full ATX case, but we'll get there when we get there. Next up is CPU and GPU preferences. If you want an Intel CPU, AMD CPU, NVIDIA GPU, AMD GPU, other preferences, or no preference at all. Now here's your area of focus. Now these are in hierarchical format. So if you want us to focus on your CPU first, I would put focus first here, and then second, third, all the way to focus last. So if we have any money left over in your budget, or we can shift things around, we'll start in this order and work our way to the end. Now, if you don't care about anything like your case or your power supply or things like that, or your memory, you can either put these at the end or just say focus last, and we'll move on from there. Now, if you already purchased or own any system components you want to use in this next system, just put them in the format of, let's say, storage, 500 gigabyte, and then if it's an M.2 SSD, a SATA SSD, whatever it is, there's no sense in buying two cases or a double power supply if you already have it. Now, any peripherals you want, a mouse, keyboard, a monitor, headset, or pretty much anything you want, just put here in this other category or just select it and we'll add it into the build. Now, any other request you can put here, like if you want RGB, no RGB, again, any other request, just put in this bottom here.
Quick disclaimer, prices will vary if any sales are going on or stock changes at the time of recording. Because of this, we tried to get the budget builds as close or slightly over the stated budget. Unless asked, we are not including taxes, shipping costs, OS keys, or peripherals in the final cost from the budget.
Alright, the user has a budget of $1,300 USD, wants a gaming type of system, wants us to do a form factor preference of Micro ATX. Funny enough, we just built a mini ITX system. Has a CPU preference of AMD and no GPU preference. Wants us to focus first on their graphics card, then their CPU and storage, then motherboard and memory, then their cooling and power supply, followed by their case. Has no already purchased or owned system components, no peripherals, and no other requests. So with that budget, we'll probably build out an AM4 and AM5 system, tweak them as best as we can to compare to, possibly look at Micro Center deals to see if we can get a bundled deal. But this time we'll also take a look at Newegg, as Micro Center doesn't have Micro ATX or mini ITX motherboards per se, but we'll see what they offer for this month, and then we'll go from there. So with that out of the way, and we know what the user wants, let's start out with our first AM4 build and see what we got. Here's our AM4 system. Went with the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 3 GHz boost into 4.1. For our CPU cooler, we went with the Thermalright Phantom Spirit Evo. For our motherboard, we went with the Gigabyte B550M. It's a Micro ATX motherboard, specifically what the user requested. For our memory, we went with the G.Skill Ripjaws 5. It's a 32 gig kit of DDR4 3600 CL16. For storage, we went with the Crucial P3 Plus, 1 TB. It's a PCIe 4.0x4. For our graphics card, we went with the RTX 4070 Super. It's a 12 GB MSI gaming card. For our case, we just picked some Micro ATX mini tower case. And then for our power supply, we have the RM750X. It's a 80 plus gold from Corsair. Now we do have $40 left in our budget, which we can move some money around. We can drop this thing down to 16 gigabytes of RAM. And if we move over to the 16 gig variant, here we have pretty much the exact same build list, except this time we added a 480 gigabyte SSD from Crucial, sitting right around $30 under budget. Now a lot of you are probably asking that if I just combine these two, plus whatever we have left, we could probably get a 2 terabyte SSD. Now when it comes to gaming, I always recommend just keeping your boot SSD separate than your gaming SSD. So we can technically get this drive on our 32 gig variant, which kind of defeats the purpose of this 16 gig variant. Just goes to show what else we can do if we move some money around. All right, let's move on to AM5. For our first AM5 system, we have the Ryzen 5 7600X. It's a 6-core, 12-thread, 4.7 GHz boosted to 5.3. We have that same Thermal Right Phantom Spirit Evo CPU cooler. For motherboard, we have the Gigabyte B650M. For memory, we have the G-Skill Flare X5. It's a 32 gig kit of DDR5 6000 CL32. For storage, we have the same Crucial P3 Plus 1 terabyte. And then we have the same video card case and power supply from before, sitting right around $6 over our budget. Now, if we change out the MSI Gaming X Slim RTX 4070 Super to the Gigabyte WindForce Overclock version of the card, it actually drops us down to $25 under budget. And quick side note here, if we take this Gigabyte WindForce Overclock and put it to our 32 gig variant of our Ryzen 7 5700X 3D, this will bring us down another $30, which means we could end up adding another one of these Crucial P3 Plus 1 terabytes. Now the reason I brought this MSI Gaming one in is because it has a higher boost clock. We will compare these later on. Here we have our Ryzen 5 7600X and our Ryzen 7 5700X 3D, just in a side-by-side comparison on Passmark. Now it's about a 7.5 different percentage in the two CPUs. Now this just tests the CPU score rating instead of actually gaming performance. So that we're actually gonna have to take a look into YouTube, see if anybody had a comparison, and then see the overall CPU comparison. Here we are on the YouTube channel Hardware Tested. It's comparing our Ryzen 7 5700X 3D and our Ryzen 5 7600X on 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. Now these are all using an RTX 4090. Our FPS will be a little bit different, but we're just looking for a basis. As we finish out here on Red Dead Redemption 2, it seems like the CPU differences in gaming are pretty marginal. It's like that 7% we just saw in Passmark. Currently here on 1080p, our Ryzen 5 7600X is at 185 and our X3D is at almost 200. So that marginal difference in 1080p, 1440p, and 4K seem to be holding up pretty well to each other, so you might actually be better off getting that Ryzen 5 7600X. We're actually going to take a look at Micro Center builds, which, just like last build, it doesn't seem like we can do unless they actually have Micro ATX boards to choose from, but we'll take a look at that. If there's nothing from there, we'll move on to Newegg, see if we can pick up anything there, and then finalize this build out. Alright, so here on versus.com we have our Gigabyte RTX 4070 Super and our MSI 4070 Super. These things are marginally different in comparison, so it's all up to the user. We can take that $30 from our Gigabyte card that we save and put it more into storage, or you can just get this MSI card instead. Here we are on Microsoft's website. Again, seems like these bundle deals are just full ATX motherboards. Doesn't seem like we can pick and choose. All stems from the last build. So we're gonna check out Newegg now, because I think we can swap some parts out. So here in the combo builder, we can see that if we go for our Ryzen 5 7600X, we get a free 1TB SSD with purchase. If we go for the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D, we get a free 32GB kit of RAM with that purchase. Now the SSD and the kit of RAM, I don't think we can choose, but I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to build our AM4 system, the AM5 system out here, and see what kind of bundle we get. Alright, so I went through everything, and some of the items, like for an SSD, they only offer the Team Group SSDs. Doesn't seem like you can actually choose, let's say, a Crucial P3 Plus or Kingston drive or anything like that. Alright, so if we go to Newegg and we buy the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D, we get a free 32GB kit of DDR4 3200 CL16. Now this is different than our 32GB kit of Ripjaw's DDR4 3600, but it still is fast RAM, and we save about $33. Pretty much means we can take that money and just buy another terabyte SSD. So that pretty much covers our AM4 system. If we do the same thing, but instead we get our Ryzen 5 7600X, we will get a 1TB NV3 M.2 SSD. This is a Kingston NV3 PCIe 4.0x4 for $224 for the CPU. So if we buy the CPU off of Newegg instead of Amazon, we will be spending about $15 more, and then we save about $45. So that's actually pretty good. We'll probably start doing these for other systems. So what I'm going to do now that we have this is I'm going to rebuild both parts list out. They will be using Newegg as opposed to buying them straight out. Real quick side note here, I've been modifying the parts list, and the Corsair Vengeance LPX kit that they give is $54 on Amazon, and they state that it's a $100 value. Now either way, we're saving money, so we'll just get back to rebuilding this thing. And after all that, here we have our Newegg AM4 build. We have our Ryzen 7 5700X 3D for $229. We have our free 32GB kit of DDR4 3200, and we were able to add another Crucial P3 Plus 1TB, sitting right around $9 under our budget. Now don't forget, we can drop this graphics card down to the Gigabyte card. That'll save us another $30. We could probably take that $30 and add it anywhere, really. And then here's our Newegg AM5 build. We have our Ryzen 5 7600X for $224. Everything else pretty much stays the same. We have our free Kingston NV3 1TB, and then we added another Crucial P3 Plus 1TB. This one does have that Gigabyte card, sitting right around $7 under our budget. And that brings us to the end. Our decision for what system to build out is our AM5 system with our Ryzen 5 7600X. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So user, it's all up to you. I would highly recommend using this build because you're building on a brand new system. If you want an AM4 system, I would go for this one, but our AM5 system is pretty much identical. So I would go with our AM5 Newegg. Now, thank you so much for watching. User, hopefully we built out the system to your specifications correctly. Everyone else, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, fill out that Google form, and I'll see you all in the next one.